But we begin once again tonight in the Middle East, where earlier today, rocks and tear gas filled the air. And tonight, just hours ago, there was much more than that. Rockets from Gaza, airstrikes from Israel, topping off a Friday filled with prayers and protests. Palestinian officials say at least 15 people were injured in the airstrikes, which Israel says targeted Hamas military sites. Retaliation, Israel says, for 2 rockets fired into its territory earlier today. All of this after Donald Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Palestinians flooded the streets, the biggest crowds in Gaza. A 30-year-old Palestinian man was shot dead, a second person died in hospital, and dozens more were injured. The U.S. decision was also the subject of a special UN Security Council meeting. Britain called the move unhelpful. The U.S. ambassador took it as an opportunity to take a swipe at the UN.
Israel will never be, and should never be, bullied into an agreement by the United Nations or by any collection of countries that have proven their disregard for Israel's security.
All that diplomatic sound and fury about this city, Jerusalem. On a day named for rage, you could expect flare-ups. Derek Stoffel certainly did, and he found them.
Trump, you will see! Trump, you will see!
Palestinians are still angry, still out on the streets. 3 days after Donald Trump called Jerusalem the capital of Israel, young and old, still filled with fury. Trump is a dog, he says, a hoodlum. In East Jerusalem, tensions flared as Israeli police moved in. There was pushing and shoving and skirmishes that flared all afternoon.
So the Israeli security forces have brought in reinforcements. We're across the street from the old city, and you can see there are officers on horseback. Hundreds of extra Israeli security forces have been deployed to the old city ahead of this day of rage.
Demonstrations here after Friday prayers have a history of turning violent quickly. Sentiments were stirred up yesterday by the militant group Hamas. It called for a day of rage and a new uprising or intifada against Israel. Instead, today was more a day of high tensions. And it seems for some Palestinians, the last few days have marked a turning point.
I believe in peace, but I don't believe in peace process.
This longtime Palestinian activist says it will be the street, not the negotiating table, that will give the Palestinian people what they long for.
Popular, continuous, popular resistance is the way.
There are some who say the subdued protests are a sign that many Palestinians are simply fed up after decades spent fighting for their own state with little to show in the end. But this Palestinian politician says not true.
People are not tired. In Al Khalil are not tired. In Nablus are not tired. In Gaza are not tired. In Al Fahim and Nazareth are not tired.
And that's why grassroots activists are vowing that these protests against Donald Trump will not be the last. Derek Stoffel, CBC News, Jerusalem.
And then there were the anti-American protests spread across this region and beyond. People filled the streets of Beirut after Friday prayers, burning tires, serving as roadblocks for protesting Palestinians living in refugee camps. Demonstrations were seen across Europe, gathering near Berlin's Brandenburg Gate and outside the U.S. Embassy in London tonight.
This is not merely some harmless symbolic maneuver.
Even on Donald Trump's doorstep, hundreds of Muslims prayed outside the White House this afternoon, part of a peaceful demonstration in solidarity with the Palestinians. Trump was home, but likely didn't see the crowd. But back here in the center of the storm, life looks different. Yes, as you saw in Derek's story, there were clashes in places like Damascus Gate, and yet Jerusalem is, in an odd way, calmer than many people expected it would be, almost as if on this day there is a holding back of sorts. For a massive crowd with a lot on their minds, they were so quiet on their way to Friday prayers. It's not easy to get to the Al-Aqsa Mosque on typical Fridays. There can be checkpoints, detours, loud, angry voices. Not today. There seems to be a bit of an Israeli strategy at play here. They haven't restricted vehicles coming through this area. They haven't restricted the age of the men coming here to pray. Those things they sometimes do on days that are expected to be controversial and full of conflict. But for the moment, they appear to just be letting this day happen. Not only did the U.S. government reportedly ask Israeli officials to mute their celebrations, but the Israeli security establishment clearly decided to ease up on a show of force, maybe thinking backing off a bit would keep the calm for now. And once the prayers were done, it was back to the usual uninterrupted chaos of the place. Commerce alongside commentary. Muspa Shabana has been selling newspapers in East Jerusalem for 70 years, under rule of the British, then the Jordanians, then the Israelis. Just let the days pass as they pass, is his advice from his perch. Don't mistake that for acceptance. It's possibly just resignation. Khaled Abutai seems to feel a bit of that. His brothers are in jail after clashes with the Israelis. Another lost an eye. Today, he just wants to go home, not do battle.
Without throw stones, without anything, if they stay here in Jerusalem, that's fight. That's we can call that fight.
So just living here is
fighting?
fighting?
Yeah, this is fighting.
Yes, there were flashes of violence today. There will be again. But daily life for Jerusalemites doesn't shift much with this week's declarations. They go on. In nearby Jewish West Jerusalem, life doesn't feel altered. Not to young Yovel.
But I think Trump is making Jerusalem officially acknowledged as the capital of Israel.
Seem like a big deal to you, or maybe it doesn't make a difference?
Biggish deal.
Yovel is busy. Homework with a family friend who's teaching him the stories behind prayers.
What's the main thing? Conflict. Conflict makes a good story.
Conflict they know, and Jerusalem they love. For Shlomo Govertz, Trump's decree is just the right thing.
We pray for Jerusalem 3 times a day, for the rebuilding of Jerusalem. So this is bound to happen. On the other hand, wow, a president of the United States changes the course of foreign policy with one proclamation.
They talk of prayers until the hot chocolate is cold, and then it's time to go. Time matters. This is also what Muslims and Jews share about this city, the rhythm of a religious Friday. Come dusk, the world powers down. The Shabbat siren signaling the Sabbath for the Jews. Most retreat into their Jerusalem homes, as do the Palestinians, while the outside world fights about and for both of them. And there's one last scene we want to show you tonight from Israel. On a day of widespread anti-American sentiment, this Tel Aviv City Hall lit up like the United States flag tonight. The red, white, and blue interchanging with Israel's color, a tribute to Donald Trump's declaration on Jerusalem.